Okay, in this special interview with Ask an Archer, we're very happy and honored to have the legend himself, Mr. Stephen Selby, who's somewhat of, I think many would regard him as an early pioneer Westerner who who specializes, I guess, in Far Eastern archery and the history. He's done a lot of research, books, and of course the founder of ATARN website as well. So many of the old schoolers will know that as well. So Stephen, thank you very much for taking your time to join me.
Thank you very much for having me. And I must say, I admire what you've been doing, dredging us moldy oldies up and extracting some information from us. I think that's really important. And I wish I'd been able to do more of it. And I wish we'd had the sort of technology to do this sort of thing 30 years ago.
Well, indeed, yeah. I mean, you know, 30 years ago, I think everyone was quite sporadic and spread out, and no one knew what someone else was doing in another country. But you know, with the benefit of the technology we have nowadays, I thought it's a good idea just to try and string everyone together and create some, you know, kind of a library or a resource, and have everyone on record of the experiences and things like that. So thank you for that. Appreciate that.
Brilliant. Very good. Yeah.
So Stephen, just for those who might not have know about you or heard about you, people who may be getting into traditional archery, just give us a kind of quick, brief summary of your intro into archery. How did it all start, and why Eastern archery in particular?
Well, here I am in the East. I live in Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
I did my university degree, my master's degree in Chinese language and literature.
Mm-hmm.
And then I worked for a long time in Hong Kong in the government, but very much involved in things to do with mainland China. So I was in the mainland a lot, and I was traveling a lot. And in one of our family holidays, I encountered archery, and the kids got very keen on it. And so we all learned to do a bit. And then when we got back, well, we kept it up. And I got bows for myself and the whole family. And when there was a chance, we'd do some shooting. And I had this sort of niggle in the back of my mind about the fact that this was Western shooting. And I was wondering, well, I wonder what Chinese archery is like.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to ask people, and I drew a complete blank.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, I went into deeper and deeper research. I mean, your series is called Ask an Archer, in which case I'm not the right person to ask because I'm a lousy archer. I'm a researcher.
Right.
Okay. But with enough background in archery that wherever I went into a subject, I tried to learn the practical skills. So I wanted to learn archery. I learned archery. I wanted to study horseback archery. I learned horseback archery.
Mm-hmm.
And where I could, I tried to get my hands on things. Some areas like crossbows were more difficult because of the restrictions that you face if you want to own a crossbow. It's
Sure.
very restricted.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's the way I got into it and delving into the history.
Originally, you're from the UK, I presume?
Yes, that's right, from Wales.
Ah, you're from Wales, okay. But the majority of your, I guess, adult life or married life, you've been over in Hong Kong, in the Far East?
That's right. I came to Hong Kong in 1978, but I've been in the Far East several times. I think my first trip to the Far East was 1973 when I first went to China, and that was during the Cultural Revolution. And then I traveled a lot. I worked in Ulaanbaatar out in Mongolia for a bit, and then finally I joined the Hong Kong government, the colonial government at that time.
Sure.
And I've been since 1978 in Hong Kong. My family have grown up here.
Wow. Okay. So quite a long time there. Also, for those that may have come across, obviously the well-known group online, ATARN, you were I guess the founding person of that. Although it's currently somewhat having a bit of a snooze at the moment, it's getting rehashed and redone. Just tell us about where the idea came about of ATARN and you know the intention behind it.
Well, I was very involved in the earliest days of the development of the internet. In the early days before the internet really took off, there were sort of interest groups, there were dial-up modems, and there were what we call chat rooms.
Yeah.
So these were the very, I mean, I've been with computers since Hollerith cards.
Right.
You know, I learned my computing in an army camp in the 1960s.
Wow. Okay.
So I couldn't deal with, you know, once they invented Windows, I just lost the plot. Then I set up, when I was working in the government, I set up the first departmental website. And so I learned a little bit about doing it, and it was handcrafted HTML. No fancy apps to do that at all. And then when I started studying archery, I realized a couple of things. Firstly, there was no point in trying to do this study on my own. I needed other people. And I reckoned that I think there were some archery interest groups then. And you could go online, you could find a few things in the chat rooms. I can't remember what they were called back then. So there was this sort of thing, and I thought, okay, there are these people around. A lot of the people I would have liked to have been in contact with were not the sort of people who'd have a computer or access to any sort of networking at all. But I started something up that was very, very low tech. Something designed to be accessible even if you were on a dial-up modem. And in those days, it was quite possible that you'd be on a dial-up modem.
Right, yeah.
And so that was one of the reasons why ATARN was so low tech. And what I wanted to try and do was get these people realizing that, okay, there's somebody here who's interested in that, and somebody's that. Let's just try and find a way of getting them talking to each other.
Right.
And it worked, and people got interested in it. And I started writing articles, and other people started writing articles, so it got like a magazine. And then I put up a sort of, not a chat section, but a bulletin board section. You could get these PHP bulletin boards, and I just put one in and plugged one in. And then I plugged in a sort of a video library section. And it was all pretty clunky. I'm no computer buff, you know,
but it was working. I mean, people were joining, and they were talking, and they were networking and things, right?
They absolutely were, yes.
Excellent.
So I ran on with that as long as I could until I got busy with it, and it got a little bit difficult to maintain, and also it was a bit expensive to maintain. And then Peter Decker said, look, I can take this up, put it on his own server. Long term, he's planning, I think, to modernize it. But in the meantime, we'd both set up the same sort of concept on Facebook. And in a sense, Facebook has rather sort of taken over.
Yes.
But in another sense, it's not working so well because they put up pictures, but they don't do research and put up articles.
Right, yeah.
And if you want to put something like in the Journal of the Society of Archery Antiquaries, well, that's great, but it's sort of slow. And I don't think we want to get into peer-reviewed stuff, but I'd really like to see people writing. You know, the number of people making amazing horn bows now is just
absolutely,
just outstanding. I mean, there are some pretty crappy ones as well, but it doesn't matter. Everybody starts somewhere. I can't make a bow at all. I've never made a bow in my life. But people share their successes and failures with hardware. But what I'm looking for and hoping for is that people will step back and look at the culture of it. History, religion, philosophy, medicine, psychology, technology. military studies. There's so many aspects to this thing.
Indeed.
And, you know, some of it gets raised, but for example, I find that the military aspect is often raised in rather a superficial way. You know, some people who are actually veterans of actual military action are worth listening to, or even people who've got deeply into reenactment are worth listening to. But there's quite a lot of stuff that's sort of speculative and should be replaced by, you know, like Peter Decker's doing real research into the Manchu manuals, and
absolutely,
other people have done some really solid research. A problem, though, is of course it needs language skills, and so really now that we have people in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in India, Pakistan, with the native language skills to really dig into things, I think that's what needs to happen.
Yeah. Your own particular research, did it focus on one particular area of Eastern archery, or you were interested in all of it, or did you kind of want to specialize in one particular aspect?
Well, my language skill is Chinese. So, you know, it's a silly story, really, but I started asking some friends around. I started with my contacts in China, and it was still at the very end of the period when Mao Zedong's thinking and was very, you know, was still leading everything. And Mao Zedong had really said that the only thing he ever wrote about archery was that Genghis Khan only knew how to draw a big bow left, right hand and shoot a big eagle. And so people would say, no, archery is not Chinese. It's something that the barbarians did. And I hadn't then somebody said, oh, well, they found a reproduction of a 19th century book in Chinese on archery. And they kindly gave me a copy, and I thought, this is great, and I read it. And it was a Qing period book. So Qing is, you know, 1644 on. And it referred to things from the Ming. And then I finally tracked down the Ming books, and they referred to the Tang dynasty, which was earlier. And then Tang books referred to the Han dynasty, which is even earlier still. And Han books referred to Confucius.
Wow.
And so it quickly became apparent that you know, I have to back out and go around, come back in, and really try and find all the sources. And that's what I did for 10 years.
So presumably you must have come across a lot of, you know, manuscripts and old books and things like that. Were you still able to access that language, or is it very old Chinese?
It's very old Chinese, which I can manage because I've studied very old Chinese.
Okay.
And where I didn't know it, I had access to people who could give me guidance. You know, from about 2,500 years ago, Chinese was written in something called oracle bone script, which was a sort of it was written on bones and tortoise shells for doing some sort of divination process.
I see.
And a normal scholar couldn't read that stuff, but I was able to get in contact with a very, very good scholar in Shanghai. And he gave me a lot of insight and information, particularly about the early ways that archery subject Chinese characters were written and how they were derived. So that was really useful.
Interesting. We're talking about, you know, going back in history and you know, getting back to the original peoples and where did archery come from. One of the questions that I like to ask a lot of the specialists such as yourself and the other people I've interviewed is, an interesting observation is that many aboriginal communities around the world, from the Amazons to sub-Saharan Africa to jungles of, you know, maybe Indonesia and the steppes of Europe, and, you know, they all have archery as a feature of their civilization and their culture, their development, their evolution. you know, what is your view on whether, you know, is it a coincidence that they all have it? Were they one people in the beginning, and they split apart, or is there some other way that, you know, just through trial and error or some type of inspiration that they came up with basically archery and using it for hunting and then for defense and then attacking, things like that?
I'm convinced that archery developed worldwide separately.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the concept is not that difficult. And things which look like a bow, forget the arrow for a minute, so a bent stick with a string, actually appear in agrarian societies, sometimes for helping winnowing, separating corn from chaff, or rice from rice husks. So you could have a basket with a bow that you could twang.
I see.
You could have a bow shape and a string. The string you would loop around. You could loop around. I don't know whether I've got one here. Okay. You see this thing? It's a drill, and you could you could have a bow-like thing driving it.
I see.
By going across.
Across. All right.
So in ancient times, when people, for example, worked jade is a very good hard stone, but you can't chip it. You can't chip away at it. You can only grind it.
I see.
So this was the tool that was used for grinding jade, to make holes in jade so that it could be used for something useful. Musical instruments, you could put some sort of resonating thing on it. And so the bow shape and the concept would have been present, I think, in a lot of different contexts. And so sticking an arrow or even a pebble on it and shooting it would have occurred to lots of people.
It was probably maybe like a natural, it would have been a natural thought evolution, possibly.
Yes. As far as I can ascertain, the First Nations of Australia didn't use the bow and arrow.
Yes, that's actually in line with what B. Dwyer did say. And I had thought that the Aboriginals of Australia were bow people, but he said no, they were more used to spears and longer articles like that. But bows and arrows, not so much, actually.
No, that's right. You know, I was just now looking down. I've got some photographs of some of the First Nations of Asia, which I collected because a lot of this, you know, it's dying out.
Yeah.
The people are not there. I like to be very careful about how I approach this because it's very easy to let racist views, not from myself, but for a sort of approach where you talk about primitive.
Yes.
You know, there used to be even a magazine called Primitive Archer. There is nothing primitive about this stuff. Shall we see if we could have a look at it, do a share screen?
Good idea. Let's do that. Yeah, I've made you the host, so you should be able to just share it now, and you're in charge.
Okay. Are you seeing the screen which says Asian First Nations?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Let me just, I need to switch something off. Okay, so let's have a look at some of these. Some of these are very early photographs. Are we clear here? I'm sorry that if we've got a share screen, your image might be.
I'm going to just move the image across, so it's fine. Yeah, we can see the picture fully. Yeah, Sentinelese, 1890s. Wow.
So Sentinelese, this is an island in which the people are still more or less living dressed or undressed like this and armed like this. I don't know if you remember a story from 4 or 5 years back where a young American man who's hoping to be a missionary landed on the beach there, and he was shot to death with arrows.
Wow. Oh, I think I vaguely heard something like that. Yeah.
Anyway, these are the Sentinelese people. There must be some sort of, I'm sorry, that was not supposed to. Sorry, this has gone absolutely mad now.
It's okay.
I've lost control. Okay.
So Sentinelese, where exactly is this an island, or is this?
It's off the west coast of India.
Ah,
the Sentinel Islands.
Because
or Andaman. Another word is Andaman Islands.
Their faces look somewhat African, but not fully African.
That's right. Well, you can't really.
It's hard.
You can't judge really.
No, it's hard to place them. Yeah.
And their eyes look strange, and the reason is that they were in front of a camera which probably took about 30 seconds to take an exposure, and so they've been told to stand stock still, but they of course blinked. So that's why their eyes look very peculiar. But look at the bows. Their bows are quite extraordinary.
Are they flexed twice or something, like an S shape or something?
I'm sorry, but every time I touch this, they're S-shaped. They're deflexed in two directions.
Wow.
How
on earth would that work?
I've got one of these bows. They're extremely rare.
Wow.
Because these people are still protected by the Indian government. Nobody is allowed to contact them.
Ah. Gosh.
And in fact, nobody has much idea about how they live or anything, but these bows are very distinctive for their very, very wide limbs.
Yes.
Their long sears. They're made from black palm with cane arrows. But again, the technology that goes into those bows is quite extraordinary. And these people will definitely have extraordinary hunting skills.
Absolutely.
They'll have a very good understanding of poisons, poison antidotes, tropical medicine. And then here we have Tibetans who have their own special tradition of archery. Even though I wouldn't say it's dying out, it's being regulated to an extent that's rather sad. They combine it with music and dancing. And religious activities,
right?
But it's still a strong tradition. But year after year, it's somehow becoming normalized.
I see.
And some of them
watered down a bit.
It's watered down a bit. Yes, I mean the Tibetans, like the present-day Bhutanese, what they used to do was they would one village would go to compete with another village. The host village women would dress up in beautiful clothes and yell insults at them. And
they would yell insults at the opposing village, yeah?
Correct, yes. So that as you were lining up your shot, and you'd be shooting 75 meters, they would be there saying, ma, you couldn't shoot a barn door at 10 feet. And they'd all be beautiful and dressed up and everything. So, and in Bhutan, I think they still do that. In Tibet, they've got rid of that. Somebody, somebody said that's uncivilized, and they should stop doing it. These people were the original inhabitants of Sri Lanka. Victims of racism by Buddhists and Muslims, and then attempts by religious groups to improve them. Very interesting, this idea that they would lie down and try and shoot with their feet.
Fascinating.
Yes.
It doesn't seem as if their bows, well, I mean, it's hard to tell, but usually shooting with the feet if the bow is very heavy. But I mean, who knows how heavy these seemingly long bows are. Well,
yes. I mean, this photograph was taken by a sort of so-called anthropologist. It was very fashionable in the 1890s to put together books about ethnology, popular books, preferably with young women with very few clothes on.
Right.
And why this pose was taken, whether it, I can't imagine that they would have done that if it never happened.
Sure. Sure.
And you can see that the arrowhead is quite massive.
Very big, yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
The fletching is as is quite common, sort of fletching you'd use in a jungle context. But what
very long arrows as well. I mean, the arrow looks like a kudo arrow or something.
Yes, it's very common in these jungle populations to use a very long arrow. Maybe it's simply so they won't get lost so easily. And they're poisoned.
Right.
So these are also the same group from Sri Lanka. So you can see that they're very competent at making bows.
Yes.
I can see, I think, more than one drawing style.
Yes, fascinating to see how they're pulling. One has like a split finger, and the other one I think it's a bit hard to tell, but not one. The guy in the forefront has 3 fingers on. The other guy, I'm not sure if it's 1 or 2 or. But
yeah, it sort of illustrates the danger of categorizing people and say, oh, this group of people all shoot this way.
Absolutely.
You shoot the way your brother shot. You shoot the way your dad or your uncle shot, and that's an end to it. It's very dangerous to say, okay, everybody in this country shot with a thumb drawn, everybody else.
Right. Yeah.
These generally
shouldn't box them in.
Correct. This is in the Philippines near Mount Pinatubo, and this group of Ataya are very proud of their archery skills. What they're actually doing here is they have a competition, a speed shooting competition, which starts on the ground, and they have to climb up a tree.
Wow!
In this case, 3 of them climbed up a tree to pose for me, but normally it'd be 1 at a time, and they'd be up there like very, very fast. They'd shoot a couple of arrows off into a target, and then they'd come down. They'd do it like a relay race.
Right.
But
I mean, climbing a tree is hard enough as it is, but with a long bow like that and all the arrows, I mean, they have to be very skilled.
Yep. Very, very skilled. And they use long arrows with quite disorganized fletching, 2 or 3 fletches. They're not going to shoot. Nobody in a jungle is going to shoot at very great distance. And everybody shooting in a jungle wants to get that arrow not going too far. They'd like to be able to get it back if they can. Obviously, jungle hunting is something you do by stealth.
Right.
And they'll be up in the tree.
Yeah.
Waiting.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop the share now.
Okay, fine.
But we might come back to it later because I've got some other things I could share with you later.
Perfect.
So are we back to regular now?
We're back to regular now. Correct. Yeah.
Yes. Good.
Excellent. That was fascinating. I mean, of course, and that's just a glimpse of some Aboriginal and native cultures. There are, so many throughout the world who have archery as a feature. But
yes, and when you study your archery, you've got to have in your mind that it could be part of their religion, it could be part of their medicine, it could be part of their psychology, it could involve ritual, warfare. So it's when you encounter these people, and there's never enough time. But there's this great desire to try and explore all of these possible aspects. And of course, none of those people in the slides I've just shown you, I mean, some are historical, but none of them would have been able to speak in English.
Right.
And if you've been lucky enough to find an interpreter, you would not find an interpreter who knew enough about archery technique to you know, translate.
Know the terminology. Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned to me that you've recently did a visit or a study in Saudi and Malaysia. What was that about, and what did you find there? Anything interesting?
Well, I went on a work trip to Saudi, and I was invited to do some teaching in Malaysia. And I thought, okay, I need to use this as an opportunity to bone up a bit about archery in Islam. You know, first, I was very lucky in Saudi that my interpreter for my job was a Quranic scholar who spoke very good English. He had been educated in the States, but gone back to Saudi. He wasn't originally a Saudi, I think.
Okay.
But he's there now, and so we had a lot of opportunities to study Quranic concepts and Islamic concepts. Unfortunately, the Saudis are not switched on archery at all.
No, that's right. Unfortunately, not.
But you know, I established quite clearly that, and when I talk about Islam and I talk about the Prophet, if I fail to use the proper words, then I hope everybody will be understanding. I'm not
of course. No, that's fine.
But at the time of the Prophet, well, if we take, you know, say before the days of the Prophet Muhammad, so in the pre-Islamic period, there was continuous warfare in the peninsula there, and in the pre-Islamic stories, there were warriors, including warrior princesses, in the stories. And then from the time of the Prophet Muhammad himself, as you know very well, there were a number of battles and a number of important events. And over the years, particularly after the Prophet's death, when people started to actually write the Quran down, because I don't know how many of your normal viewers know that the Quran went for a long time as only an oral tradition.
Absolutely, correct, yeah.
And that the Prophet himself learned it from the angel Jabril, but didn't write it down. And I think Quran itself means recitation, does it not?
Correct, yeah, recitation, yes.
Please always correct me if I'm saying the wrong thing.
I will, but you're absolutely, you're spot on, you're doing fine, yeah.
So then over a period of time when it became the fashion to write the Quran, it also became the fashion to try and make a record of things that the Prophet himself had said. And I think in the first period it was rather chaotic, but then there was a strong effort to try and find out what was genuinely said.
Correct.
And so various scholars and groups would have analyzed how reliable these things were. They were written down as the ahadith.
Correct.
And several ahadith do actually deal with archery. I think Hani recorded 40, but my friends tell me that there should be more than that. So we can, you know, we learn from that. But in Indonesia and Malaysia, they have gone much further to try and bring back the real Islamic virtue of archery. Men and women can equally take part. Some of the outstanding archers are women.
Indeed.
And you know, when I've taught in a group, I've taught men and women together. There are some challenges there, and I think that the next time if I go to teach, I'm going to take my daughter with me. It's you know, for a man teaching students, including women, if you're teaching an archer and you can't see their body, you can't really tell them very much what's going on. So we need to have women instructors who can go with the women. But then when it comes to interacting in a competition or in games, then everybody is together, everybody behaves appropriately, and it just works wonderfully.
Yeah.
And I think that you've interviewed one of their leading horseback archers, haven't you?
Indeed, yes. Amira, she's a Malaysian girl, a lovely girl. I met her at a couple of competitions abroad, and she's kind of one of the leading and sole female horseback archer in Malaysia. There are more coming through, but for reasons of circumstance or family issues or just not being able to access a horse or things like that, there's not as many females as she would like. But she's really doing a lot of groundbreaking work there, so she's doing very well.
Well, she's yes, I mean, and she's a devout Muslim, and she's doing absolutely outstanding work. But many ordinary people now are just buying bows and arrows and going on archery courses, and the archery competitions are being held in the masjid, and it's gradually it's gaining more and more importance.
Indeed.
I don't know about places like Bangladesh, but I think in future, I'm looking forward to seeing Muslim communities in Asia. And I shouldn't forget to mention that Muslims in China have been taking archery very seriously, even through the toughest times of the Cultural Revolution. They were still having archery competitions.
Excellent. That was actually something I wanted to move on to. There is a tradition that we have in Islam where, i.e. a hadith or a related historical event, that one of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his name was Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas. He was somewhat the figurehead of archery in Islam. He was the first Muslim to shoot an arrow in defense of Islam against the enemies. He was the first archer to be praised by the Prophet Muhammad about shooting arrows. The Prophet made many prayers, divine prayers for him, and he was a successful archer, excellent archer. It is said that after the demise of the Prophet, he left the peninsula, he left the Hijaz, and he actually ended up in China. And it is said, but we don't know 100% for sure, but that he's buried there. And some people have said they've gone to visit his, we don't necessarily call it a shrine, we don't necessarily pray to him per se, but we do see it as a blessed area, a blessed place. But I would be interested to know about what the Muslims in China have been doing in terms of archery. How far back does their history go with archery? Do you know anything about that?
Into various groups. There are those which one might call the Han Chinese. Chinese, just like every Chinese that you come, but they are, in terms of religion, they are Muslims. You have the Turkic groups. And then you have Mongols and Tibetans who, for one reason or another, became Muslim. For instance, a Tibetan wouldn't want to be associated with killing animals. And so quite a lot of Muslims were dealing with that sort of aspect. And the same to some extent. And the other thing is that you recall that there was the Silk Route and there was a huge volume of trade between China and the West, mostly conducted by Muslims. And under Islamic trade law and contract law, it would be much easier to enter into contracts if one had entered Islam. So there was a very strong commercial reason why people would enter into Islam. I'm afraid, basically for commercial reasons.
Sure. Yeah.
But then when you see the Chinese Muslims, for instance, doing their archery, they still have the two mounds separated at 80 meters. And
lovely.
they go to one mound and shoot at the other, and then they walk along what one could call the path of golden flowers, as an image of proceeding, to heaven after they die. They keep that tradition. And that's a typical aspect of Islamic archery in China.
I think that stems from one of the sayings of the Prophet, who himself was an archer. He had a number of bows at the time of his passing, and he even named his bows, in fact. But one of the hadiths, one of the sayings of the Prophet is that between the two archery targets is a garden of the gardens of paradise. Pointing to the fact that archery was not just something to do if you're bored or in your spare time, but it was somewhat of a religious activity and religious act, as something that we take seriously, and we see it as more of a discipline rather than just a sport. And I think this is why many Muslims probably have taken up archery, because they see it as a practice of the Prophet, what we call a sunnah, and it's a way of trying to emulate and be more like him. So I think for most Muslims, it's somewhat of a religious thing.
I think I heard it said, and correct me if I'm wrong, that one of the disciples of the Prophet Muhammad was absent from a meeting, and the Prophet was quite unhappy and said, "Where is he?" And the others said, "He's gone out for recreation."
Right.
And the Prophet thought that was quite improper, until he found out that the recreation was archery practice, and after that everything was all right.
Yeah, indeed.
Another hadith that was, I think there are two hadiths that are very interesting in his disapproval of what he called Persian bows.
Right.
And his approval of Arab bows, on the basis that if the string broke on a Persian bow, it was useless. But if a string broke on an Arab bow, it could still be used as a weapon.
I see.
And from that, I speculate that Arab bows were self bows.
Right.
And that if the string broke, they'd still be straight, and you could use it as almost as a spear. But a Persian bow would have been a recurve, and if the string broke, it would be useless.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that. Not to say it's not true, but that's certainly very interesting. One of the other interpretations I had heard is that at the time, the Muslims were fighting the Persians, and when the Prophet said to one of his companions, "Take that Persian bow out of your hand and use this Arabian bow," possibly because it was, we don't use the weapons of the enemies, possibly something to do with that, but I'm not saying for sure. But very likely it was to do with the fact that, yes, Arabian bows were possibly self bows. Unfortunately, today we don't have much historical hard evidence as we do for Persian bows or Turkish bows, Chinese bows, Indian bows, etc. A lot of that.
This is right. And when you look at Latham and Patterson, Arab archery, you have to remember that they were translating works from North Africa. Arab archery is not about the Arabian Peninsula.
No, that's right. Yes, it's North Africa. Yeah, correct. Interesting. You do have some nice things for us to look at, Stephen. So why don't we take a look at some of the interesting things that you're going to show us?
Well, I thought I'd... because one thing I'm very privileged to have is quite a large collection of archery objects. Yeah. And everybody spends a lot of time sort of considering bows and arrows. And I thought that maybe we could have a look at some crossbow.
Please.
Aspects. And I thought, now I'm just going to see whether I can do this. I hope I don't mess up everything. Okay. I'm going to try a camera change.
Okay. And see your desk. Yes.
Okay, let's I keep thinking of things in a mirror, and of course everything's back to front.
Okay.
But I'm showing you here a hand dynasty crossbow mechanism. And I'm going to, if it's all right, I'm just going to talk about in some detail.
Please,
now,
please.
For friends who'd like to take screenshots and things, what I've done is I've put it on squared paper with 5mm squares. So if you take screenshots and you want to know how big is this, just remember that what I'm showing you is on 5mm squares. I'm going to show you this first, and then we can maybe have a look at one or two things on share screen. But let me show you this first.
Okay.
Here we have a very large mechanism, as you can see just in my hands. It's extremely heavy. And this is the trigger.
Okay.
Now this one it doesn't move freely. I'll show you one that does move freely.
Okay.
This is the sighting mechanism here.
Right.
And this is the block which holds it all together. And then here we have the teeth, but actually, if they could come up, and this one can't, but I will show you one later which can.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, let me show you that now, actually.
Quite a mechanism.
Here we are with another one.
Okay.
And, this is where the string is going to be.
Okay.
And when we release the trigger, hang on, get this right. So here's the trigger.
Yes.
When we release the trigger,
the teeth disappear.
Will go down. The sighting mechanism will fall forward.
Right.
And when we load, the sighting mechanism will go back up again, and it'll catch into here. And I'll show you a little bit more about that later. But basically, I mean, you imagine you're a hand soldier, and so this is your M16.
I see. So just that's I say small. I mean, yeah, small device. It's a handheld device.
The trigger mechanism.
I see. Right.
It's the trigger mechanism. So there are these two pins, which are the axles. They're reamed, so that one end is thicker than the other.
Okay.
Would
this mechanism be part of something bigger, or this is it by itself? Okay.
It is absolutely correct, and I'm going to show you that if I can a bit later with some slide shares. So these are reamed, so one end is thicker than the other, and just by banging them with a mallet, one would be able to take these out.
Right.
Because on campaign, you'd have to be able to lubricate these. You'd have your mutton fat with you, or your goose fat, and you keep these lubricated. Now, bear in mind that this thing you're looking at is 2,000 years old.
Wow, unbelievable.
And it has not rusted at all.
That is fascinating.
This is still, look at it. It's shining.
Unbelievable. And I mean, such a quite well, manufactured as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And carved.
They were manufactured with huge care and attention.
Wow.
So I'm just being a good soldier now, and I'm putting it back together again.
Wow.
So if we go to the top here, we can see a shape cut into the top. The stock of this crossbow continues forward. Okay? So this end is the end nearest me. This is the and the trigger. The trigger is trigger is here.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Here's the trigger, and here is the shape of fletching.
Ah.
Can you see it at the top?
Yes.
Cut into it.
I see.
So if we look at the end, how good can we get a pic? That's pretty good, isn't it?
That's not bad. Yeah.
You can just about see the cross section there. So that would be the shaft, and that would be where the fletching would go.
I see.
And the fletching is slightly angled down, suggesting that we had triple fletching.
Right.
Now this one, which I started out with, is exciting because it has a long message carved on it.
Oh yes, just about to see
at
that.
the time of manufacture. So let's just go. I'm going to do a share screen.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
Am I okay for share screen?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. So let's go here. Okay. This is a slightly tidied up picture of the message. So what it actually says is this is a reign period called Yongyuan, these two characters, Chinese characters.
Right.
So if some of your guests here are Chinese, they will reckon Yongyuan. So we suspect this is a Han Dynasty crossbow. So let's get our book out. Here's my little handbook. Okay. Oh, this one. Okay. All right. Yeah. There's still that camera. So I'll get my book out, and we find that indeed that there was a Yongyuan reign period here, and then it says year 13.
Okay.
All right. 13 year.
Yes.
Yeah. So if we go through the directory and we find that it says, oops, yeah, 13 year was 101 AD. So we know exactly what year this mechanism was made.
So this is like a bar. This is
AD. But then it says some.
It's like a barcode for the manufacturer.
Yes, this shows that it came out, and it actually says that it came out of the official military arms factory of the Han Dynasty. And the next interesting thing is, now most of it is saying which particular officials, the names of the officials who were involved in making it. But this is really interesting here. This says that it was a 4 Dan crossbow. Now Dan was a measure, and it was 30 kilograms.
Okay.
So this was a 120 kilogram draw weight crossbow.
Goodness.
Yeah, but remember it's a crossbow.
Yeah. Okay.
And we're going to see. So forget any ideas about pulling a bow.
Yeah.
And we'll see now what this. It also gives the names of the person who did the drawings for it, who made the molds, the person who cast it, and then it said in the Great Han at the Linyo factory. That was where it was made. Now, here's a Han crossbow reproduction. So this is where your crossbow mechanism would have sat.
I see.
Inside this wooden stock.
Yes. Right.
The trigger would have been down here with the trigger guard. Okay. And then we have here, in crossbows, this would be called the prods. Now, there were various ways of making prods, and using a hornbow was the most rare.
Right.
Mostly they would be made of self-wood. Or self-wood, or a leaf spring made of bamboo.
Yes.
One interesting thing I've always been told by people in Southeast China who are still making crossbows like this is that once the string is drawn back here to the latch, the ends of the prods and the point where the string is attached form an equilateral triangle.
Really? Wow.
Okay, that's right. And they said that that is the correct way for making all crossbows. That when it's drawn, the distance from this is A, all right?
Yes.
Are you seeing my mouse pointer?
Yeah, on the mechanism, yes.
Okay. So here's A, here's
Yes.
B, here's
Yeah.
C, all right?
Right. Yeah.
If this is drawn back to B,
Yes.
then A, B, C is an equilateral triangle.
Got you. Yes.
The length of the sides is equal.
Interesting.
So we can see here, this is, sorry, this is a bit of a nuisance, this, but I don't know that I can get rid of this. Anyway, this shows the crossbow mechanism built into the wood.
Yeah.
The metal casing, which I'm now putting here, this, are you seeing the image of me as well?
Yes.
Okay, in the little window, right?
Yes, correct.
This metal casing was vital because the tension of all of these parts couldn't just go directly transmitted into the wood. So it had to be there to allow the tension to be spread evenly over the wood.
Yes.
And then here's the mechanism, and here it is latched, and this annoying thing is not letting me show you where it's latched. And then when you release the trigger, the teeth holding the string come down, the string is released. Okay.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is if you angle this whole crossbow down and pull the string back up against this part,
yes,
it will automatically latch it underneath.
Ah, okay, yes, okay, like a lever, it pushes the top. Yes, okay.
Yeah. Here you can see how it does it. All right. If you're pushing against here,
yes,
this is rotating and coming up.
Yes.
This peg here is pushing that one up,
yes,
and this is coming forward, and they will neatly snap into place.
Interesting. Is this something that the hand would came up with themselves, or do you think they were influenced from
Han, as in the Han Dynasty? No, it was earlier. It was at least 200 years earlier than the Han Dynasty. Now, this is an actual hand crossbow in my collection.
Wow.
Particularly well-preserved one. So what you're seeing here is the grip, and it's striking with all of these weapons that I have, and I see from the Han Dynasty that the hands of the people, the hand size of the people is quite small. This is really, I can't put my fist in there.
Oh, really? Okay, interesting.
So either you had the major part of your hand here and just two fingers in. You couldn't do a pistol grip here, that's certain.
Right.
So this would be the sighting mechanism. This is where you would hold the stock with the other hand.
Right.
This thing here is where a binding would hold the prods, and the prods went through this hole.
Okay, yes.
You with me?
Yes,
so the prods
go through there.
The prod down here, we can see how the mechanism is set into the wood. So it's all beautifully made. And, sorry, as you can see, it's also beautifully decorated.
Wow, a lot of detail. Oh, stunning.
Beautifully detailed. Absolutely stunning. Now, for anybody who is interested in making their own hand crossbow and using this as a decoration, let me tell you that this type of imagery is relating to death. It is relating to burials and the afterlife.
Right.
So this crossbow was buried as something to go with a body after death.
I see.
And by all means copy it, go for it. But just remember that you're not seeing something that similar, that shows what a living person's crossbow was like.
I see.
I mean, the one that was actually used would be like that, a plain thing.
Yes. Fascinating.
So also from from my collection, this is a part of a sensor. A sensor is a thing for putting perfumed smoke in. And this shows typically how a crossbow was loaded with feet bracing
Oh,
across.
I see. He's pulling, yes.
Yeah. And it's just very tiny detail. But now, you know, the first emperor of the Qin, there's the Terracotta Warriors.
Yes.
You've heard of them.
Absolutely.
So the Terracotta Warriors also have one Terracotta Warrior loading a crossbow more or less like this. Always with one hand above and one hand below. Can you see that here?
Yes, I can actually see that. They've even put that detail on there.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
One would have normally thought both hands on top and you're pulling, much like you're rowing a boat, for example, an oar.
Yes. Maybe people thought that there was less likely to be an accident and a release, an unprepared release if you did it like that. I have no idea why, but it's a rather consistent thing. And then here's a hunter. These are both hunters with his kit.
Yeah.
And his crossbow over his shoulder.
Fascinating.
Also from the Han Dynasty. Normally you would also say, well, you wouldn't take a crossbow up on horseback, but this is a little tiny figure of a horseman, also with a crossbow up on his horse. And he's bracing it. He's actually sitting sideways.
He's bracing the bow on the horse.
Sitting sideways, and he's actually bracing the crossbow.
Wow. So that's a crossbow for horse, not even a traditional bow. Okay.
Not a traditional bow. It's definitely a crossbow. And then this is an image of a hunter with his dog, and this illustrates very clearly how the leaf spring prods were made.
Yes. Right.
I wouldn't pay much attention to the scale here.
No.
And then this is a Ming dynasty, much later, 1368 to 1644, Ming dynasty. And here we are showing how crossbows should be used in formation. Now here, they're bracing their crossbows using a cord under their feet.
Right. Wow.
But the technology hasn't changed very much, as you can see. There's a slightly different profile to the crossbow. And this is something I've also seen in South China. These prods are very, very roughly made just by bundles of bamboo.
I see. And they just wound together. Yeah. Yes,
that's not even a serious attempt to make a leaf spring mechanism like the previous one. You know, this is clearly a nice, tidy leaf spring. But this is a load of rubbish. And Ming Dynasty crossbows, the Ming came after the Mongols had invaded China and had their Yuan dynasty.
Right.
The Ming finally threw the Mongols out. But writers of the Ming dynasty say that the technology of crossbows have been completely lost. So these things, they didn't know how to make them.
I see.
And they made the latches of crossbows out of deer antler, which broke continuously. That was the complaint.
I see. Yeah, not strong enough.
So that is, I'm going to stop my sharing there.
Okay.
And just show you one or two more.
Please.
One more interesting element. This is a very, very early crossbow mechanism. And here the sighting mechanism is in the shape of a sort of horse's head or a dragon's head.
I see.
And the one thing I wanted to show you was this thing at the back. It's a safety mechanism. As long as it's in that position, you can't release the crossbow. But if you turn it round, you can release. So it shows that one of the things that China invented was the safety catch on a on a crossbow.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Just such a simple thing, you know. Here's the trigger.
Yes.
This is just a little tube.
Yeah.
On. Here we go. Here we can release. Turn it on this way. And
I see.
So here's the trigger guard.
Yes.
Unusually in this one, it's made of bronze. This is a spacer of some sort. I never quite worked out where it was supposed to go, but it's somewhere in here.
Okay.
And in this case, the whole of the casing would have been on the outside of the wood, not the inside. The wood would be inside.
Fascinating how I'm just thinking of the tools that they would have used to make kind of these intricate pieces.
They are cast bronze. So everything was made in a mold, and it was cast, and then we can see
or forged.
Not forged.
Oh, not forged.
The Chinese never ever hit bronze. They would drill it, but they would never hit it. They always cast it. And then let's see if we can see then when they were smoothing it, they would take that element and they would rub it on a stone with sand or to fine it. But basically, for some reason, and I've never discovered why, Chinese people would never hit bronze.
Interesting.
I'm going to change my camera now, so you can see my ugly mug again. There we go. Yeah, sorry. So that was my little digression into crossbows.
No, that's fascinating. Very, very interesting. And there's certainly something that no one else really has. And you know, those are actual artifacts from that time. It's amazing that they've preserved so long as well.
Yes, there's another, I should have brought it really, as a very nice little crossbow mechanism, probably used by Muslim people, and the sighting mechanism shows presumably a Muslim with a turban, and as the crossbow is released, he goes down to pray.
Oh,
presumably the same way as a Muslim would shout "God is great" as they release the arrow.
Interesting.
Rather like salat, you know.
Yes, that's right. That's the kind of movements they would make. And again, I mean that points to the religiousness and the spirituality of archery. That it's not just a mundane kind of activity, but it's something that can connect you to a higher reality, to the heavens and things like that. For the Chinese, or I guess archery generally in the Far East, it is, and please correct me, but it is somewhat more of a meditative activity or a religious activity. To what extent with the Chinese is it quite a religious aspect or part of their life, either now or in history?
In history, Chinese did one rather extraordinary thing with archery. They created a ritual out of it. Because Confucius himself was directly involved in it. In fact, it says in one or two places that he was an instructor. Now, the social background was that people tended to settle any issue face to face.
Yes.
And Confucius said, let's not do that. Let's just be both aiming in the same direction and compare the best between two in that way.
Rather than head on.
Rather than head on. So he didn't invent that. And in fact, when he wrote about it, he said this, he already said in ancient times it was like this. And actually I've just completed quite a lot of research onto the origin of the rituals. They seem to be a sort of ritual of submission, using the most powerful weapon that was available to mankind in Chinese views, and to show that it was being used in a submissive way. using ritual movements and going according to ritual hymns, which had special ritual significance. And the significance of these hymns was all related to submission to the political power of the ruling class.
Interesting.
But then when you read the Chinese works, you'll find that there's philosophy involved there. There is religion, astrology,
yes,
and then go to psychology, medicine.
I mean, that we get a lot of these archery quotes that have come from Far Eastern philosophers about higher aspects of meditation and the kind of psychological aspects that or benefits it can have for you. And many, I guess we can call them sages, or many wise people in history always comment about the bow and the arrow and the way that it works together and the way that it can kind of transcend the human psyche as well.
Yes, I mean, a lot of what is said is blindingly obvious, but in the time of Confucius and before, hunting and the use of the bow and arrow with chariots was a major activity of the aristocratic classes. So it was very convenient to use the bow and arrow and things to do with it as a simile, as a metaphor for various aspects of life. And Confucius would say that for any subject, you have to go past the actual detail of movement and having to think about your bodily movement. Just like a musician, I mean, if you're a violinist or a pianist, you've got to get past thinking where your fingers are going and thinking about the rhythm and have it so internalized that you can then make a proper performance. So this is one of the things Confucius said, that you've got to internalize something fully before you can perform archery properly. And he wanted it to perform in time to music as well.
Okay, interesting. So it's certainly considered one of the arts as well, isn't it? Rather than a sport.
Yeah, a skill. The word, people get misled a little bit because the word that was used nowadays means art. In Chinese, but in Confucius' time meant just a skill.
A skill, right.
So dentistry and medicine was also part of this skill.
I see. Has archery also been, an activity of the royalty as well, and the higher echelons of society, or was it something that just the average person would be expected to know or would know?
It was very important in terms of the nobility, from the king down. All the records, and I've read many, including contemporaneous records, not just things written later, but actually at the time, talking about kings and nobles shooting. They had a system, in fact, where the young princes had to go through archery training as part of a sort of 6 courses of study. So they had to learn ritual movement, ritual music, archery, charioteering, the literature, and mathematics. Mathematics mainly concerned with astrology.
I see.
So there were these 6 courses that they had to complete over a period of 7 years, and then they were examined at a special location near the royal palace of the capital.
Yes.
And their examination included an examination in archery.
Yes. I think there was something. Yeah, I had seen that. I think I was speaking to Justin Ma about that, and someone had sent something to me. I'm not sure if I can find it now, but yes, it listed those skills, those disciplines for someone to be somewhat of a respectable person in society.
Correct, yes.
Interesting, fascinating. Just to to nearly wrap up, I just wanted to ask you about, you mentioned about horn bows and things like that. There are, again, many people who are now able to experiment. What, in your view, are the elements of a good horn bow?
Glue.
Ah.
Glue, glue, and glue.
That was an easy answer. Okay.
Yeah, if you can't get the glue right, you can't get anything right. Now, I've told you I'm not a hornbow maker. But I've been sitting next to hornbow makers of every possible nationality, including the modern ones. And it's a bit mean to call them hornbows because they should be really called glue bows.
They're more glue than horn.
It's not the amount, it's just that horn facilitates one movement, the wood core another movement, the sinew facilitates something else, the sears, the wooden ends, but basically whether it works or not and how well it works, to me, after talking to all of these people, is how you deal with the glue. And of course, it's not just one recipe for glue for the whole bow. Different, the glue used for instance, gluing the horn to the belly is one recipe and one temperature. The wooden components, something else. And the sinew, something else. And then attaching, say, birch bark or something, that's something else. Yeah. Basically, the ingredient is the same. It could be a fish glue or it could be an animal glue, but it has got to be exactly right. Right. And some bowyers, especially in China, have mentioned that they would add saliva to it, and wet surfaces with saliva before they apply glue. Whether that tradition is more, I don't know, superstitious, I don't know. Because there's an old superstition among Chinese craftsmen making weapons of adding elements like hair and fingernails, elements of the human body, to the mix.
Oh, I see. Probably they think it's an extension of themselves, or a part of them is in the bow or something like that.
Absolutely that. And then I think another element for people making, from what I've learned about people who went through the traditional apprenticeships, they started learning to work with wood. But their first bows were children's bows. They wouldn't go straight into making an adult bow.
Yeah, they had to break it in slowly.
Yeah, they break it in slowly. Break a child's bow, and I've said this sometimes on the internet and things, and work their way up. But the glue is the key. Absolutely.
Just to wrap up, because I'm just sensitive of the time, and it really has flown. You've met Charles Grayson, is that correct?
Oh yes, that's right. We were good friends. Bert Grayson. Yes. He called himself Bert.
Oh, okay, Bert. All right.
His name was Charles, and he called himself Bert. So my kids know him as Uncle Bert.
Okay.
Also Uncle Yellow Paper, because he would write me long letters on bright yellow paper. Okay. But he taught me a tremendous amount in my early days when I was trying to understand. And particularly when I was translating some of the very early texts on bow making from Chinese into English, and then I had to send them around people. Alessio Cenni in Italy, and Bert Grayson definitely, Adam Karpovich, Bede Dwyer. I would send the drafts around and say, if you looked at this, would it make sense? And some of them would say yes, and some of them would say no. And gradually, with their advice, I was able to pull together an acceptable translation.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, and of course he has the wonderful collection in the university there. It's not on display. You have to book and go in and see it.
Ah, okay. That's in Michigan or Minnesota, was it?
Is it Minnesota? Yeah, it's one of the Midwestern states anyway.
Okay.
In the university, in the Department of Anthropology, and it's a really good collection. But the thing is that you can go in, put a pair of gloves on, and go and handle stuff. It's not like in the museum.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Well, I think I'm pretty much out of questions. So, Stephen, I really appreciate your time, and thank you for taking your time out to speak with me. It's been fascinating to see the a couple of the many artifacts that you do have, and to get a glimpse of your knowledge and experience. On behalf of kind of the archery community and people who are watching this, we appreciate yourself as a archery enthusiast, as a researcher, all of the hard work you put into lay the foundation for people like ourselves who are kind of on your shoulders and the shoulders of people like you as well. So it's been really an honor to meet you, and hopefully at one point, we hope, post-COVID, we can maybe cross paths at some point.
Yeah, you've got to, well, I think you've done a wonderful job, but it is unfortunate that it's all virtual. If we could get all of these folks together.
That would be a project.
that would be a project. I have, by the way, in 30 years, I've never succeeded at getting them all in one place, but I've got, from time to time, I've got a few. So please keep at it and keep your good work up. I really appreciate it. I'm learning a lot from watching all your productions. Thank you.
Honored. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Stephen, and you take care. We'll speak to you again soon. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.